It is with profound honor that I have been entrusted by Speaker Mike Johnson and Chairman James Comer to lead the House Oversight Task Force on Declassification of Federal Secrets. Together with the help of the White House, our intelligence allies, the Department of Defense, the Department of Justice, we will be conducting investigations into the following: the assassinations of JFK, RFK, and Dr. Martin Luther King, unidentified aerial phenomena, also known as UAPs, unidentified submerged objects, also known as USOs, the Epstein client list, the origins of COVID-19, and the 9/11 files.
I thought I'd share my thoughts on this rather mind-blowing bit of information here that you just heard, where, we're not just talking about the declassification of the JFK assassination files, but we're adding on top of that Robert F.K. Jr., Martin Luther King Jr., the 9/11 story or whatever was held back from the public regarding that, the Epstein client list, and unidentified flying objects, unidentified aerial phenomenon, unidentified underwater objects, or whatever she said that was. This is all very fascinating to people like you and I who, obviously pay attention to blogs and videos and stories talking about these topics, but it's very rare that we get, public officials talking very bluntly about, like, we're going to release this stuff. So I try to think what ties all of this together. What is the common thread here with all these topics? Well, I think that the common thread is that there's a wide assumption in the public that the information that has previously been held back from the public has been held back because it reveals something about the role of individuals and entities in the United States that had a hand in it. In other words, the JFK assassination files probably reveal the role of someone in the government or the CIA or the FBI. Probably incriminates people on the inside. In other words, it was probably an inside job. The Epstein client list, why are they holding back the list of people that, with Jeffrey Epstein, exploited women, and probably young women, probably some pedophilia. We're talking rape, abuse, the worst kind of sexual exploitation. Why in the hell are the government officials or the judges or whoever, why are they protecting the identities of the individuals who, went on the Lolita Express or whatever it was and went to the island? I mean, why are these people being protected? Obviously, they're people that, are probably very powerful and don't want to be found out, and they're being protected. There is a culture of this that is protecting the guilty. And so I'm very much behind this, and I hope you all are too. But I think there is probably some kind of catch. But before I get into that, let's talk a little bit about how this all started. So if you go online and you go do a search for, executive orders, I did it here in DuckDuckGo. And there's this link that comes up for Federal Register. It's federalregister.gov. It's a government website, and it shows you all the executive orders. So you click on it, and sorry, my screen is kind of small here. I'm not getting the whole page, but you can see here, you can download all this stuff. But the easiest way to look at the one I'm going to show you is to just go right here. It shows you all the executive orders that Donald Trump has signed so far. This page, I don't know if it's updated in real time. I think there's a little bit of lag. So if you hear about an executive order that was signed today, you may not see it for a couple of days on here. But anyway, if we click on 2025, you get all the executive orders. And I know it's probably really boring for some of you to sit down and read this stuff, but one of these gets signed, and you read it, various news articles, and it's a good exercise to read the actual measure itself and compare that to what the news says, because a lot of times, the news will try and mix up or misinterpret what it's saying. But it's also important to do just to be an informed citizen, and what did they say they were going to do here, and what did they then actually do. So here we go. Executive Order 14176, Declassification of Records concerning the assassinations of President John F. Kennedy, Senator Robert F. Kennedy, and Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Signed January 23rd, 2025. So if we go right here, within 15 days of the date of this order, the Director of National Intelligence and the Attorney General shall, in coordination with the Assistant to the President for National Security Affairs and the Counsel to the President, present a plan to the President for the full and complete release of the records relating to the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Within 45 days of the date of this order, the Director of National Intelligence and the Attorney General shall, in coordination with the Assistant to the President for National Security Affairs and to the Counsel to the President, review records related to the assassinations of Senator Robert F. Kennedy and the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and present a plan to the President for the full and complete release of these records. So 45 days would be what? From January 23rd. Take us into March, which is when they said in that video there they would have an update for us. Now, my first question is, why do we need a task force when this information is supposed to be released to the public? In other words, presumably you'll just be able to see it somewhere, or you can do a Freedom of Information Act request like I've done in some of my videos, and it just open to the public. Anyone can look at it, however many thousands of pages it is, presumably with very little redactions or maybe no redactions. Why do we need this task force? Well, this kind of reminds me, unfortunately, of the church hearings a little bit, although I don't know if this is quite that bad. I went over the church hearings in an earlier video I did about MK Ultra, and the church hearings in the 70s revealed some of the activity that the CIA was doing with mind control, and it's basically the hearing that we can point to and say, yes, there was such a thing as MK Ultra. It really happened, but not a whole lot happened as a result of it. I mean, I don't know who was really held accountable. That's the thing. Nobody's ever held accountable. There was a guy, an Anthony Fauci sort of character named Gottlieb, I think, and he avoided any kind of accountability. He was kind of responsible for a lot of it. And he retired rich and comfy, and nobody went to jail or nothing. And so it just makes you wonder: is it really this task force's job to help unveil this information, or is it their job to sort of control it so it's rolled out in a manner that does the least amount of damage to those people who we know are probably responsible as possible? One of the weirder details about the JFK thing, which I heard from Bill Cooper, who's someone I mention a lot here because he was a big inspiration for me getting into a lot of this stuff. He has a lot of really thorough presentations on the assassination of John F. Kennedy Jr. But I remember he mentioned something about all these weird details, like where the body went and how it was treated, and the brain was taken out and switched out for another one or something. I don't know. But Anna Paulina Luna does mention in this video that one of the doctors or someone who was present in the room when Kennedy's body was first looked at is someone they're going to be talking to, maybe even some whistleblowers, FBI people. I mean, according to Bill Cooper, a lot of people who were even present to see JFK get assassinated have mysteriously become deceased over the years. Now, obviously, this was a long time now, but I'm talking about within the days, weeks, months, and years just after the assassination, people just ended up dead all over the place. So to have anybody with any kind of information that's still alive and willing to talk is kind of a big deal. And That either says something about the authenticity of this revealing, or it says something about the involvement of the powers that be and how much control they have over the situation. Anyway, to just sort of digress for a second, I talk about the Beatles a lot lately. Well, one interesting coincidence, and I'm not the first one to mention this by any means, is that the same day that John F. Kennedy was assassinated was the day the second Beatles album was released. And it was also the first album released in North America. And within just a couple months, the Beatles flew into John F. Kennedy International Airport and appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show, which was their big introduction to the United States audience. It's considered one of those, historical moments where the Beatles, and that type of band was sort of born into the culture. And thus the beginning of the British invasion, which I've talked about a lot. So it's kind of an interesting coincidence there. Regarding the underwater unidentified craft or whatever, this reminds me again of Bill Cooper, because Bill Cooper, who's dead now, highly recommend watching his video in Sedona. The quality is not that great, but you can find it fairly easily online, although it's getting harder and harder to find videos like this. So try and see them or grab them if you can when you see them. But Bill Cooper elaborates on what he saw when he was a young military guy, Navy or something like that. He said he was on some kind of ship and a bunch of other people saw it, 20 other guys or so. This craft came out of the water, performed impossible maneuvers, and then went back into the water, and the water just sort of sucked the thing up. Like, it didn't even splash. It was like this weird feat of physics, the way that the water moved, and the ship went in there, up and in and out, in and out. And he said that this occurred for like 20 minutes or so, and they just sat there with their jaws in their laps going, what in the F is this? And then afterwards, they brought Bill Cooper in the office, and they're like, you don't say a word about this to anybody. Bill Cooper later said that he believes he was shown documents, possible misinformation documents that he was supposedly not supposed to see, in order to get him to put that information out there, specifically as a disinformation campaign. And at the end of his life, he admitted these things, which I think shows to his, it's an example of his honesty, because if he was full of shit, he could have just held on to whatever he said before just to keep his pride intact. I'm not going to change what I said, even though it's true, because it'll make me look bad. No, he was very frank. So for that reason, I think that he was an important person to look up and follow and listen to what he had to say, because wow, now here we go. Here we have, the government officials flat out telling us we're gonna talk about that stuff that previously, people laughed at or didn't want to pay attention to. As far as the alien thing, I know a lot of people want to believe, and I for many years did want to believe in aliens and an alien race and all this. And I'm not saying they don't exist, but I think that a lot more of that story has to do with the secret black budget of the government and the secret technology. It has a lot more to do with keeping us dumbed down as a people, making us believe that technology has only gone this far when it's actually gone a lot further. There's a lot of very practical reasons why that conspiracy would be occurring all the time. It benefits the evil people in charge, or whatever, the evil people in the deep state. As far as the whole C-19 thing, I mean, why is there so much secrecy behind the origin? I mean, we still don't know where it came from. I mean, come on. It's the biggest psychological operation ever waged against, the free people that I can think of. It's the scariest, most terrible thing I've seen in my life, I think. It's just awful. This was like the JFK of, assassination of my lifetime. I would say it was worse than 9/11. Killed a lot more people, but did a lot more damage in the aftermath and with all the psychological operations. And it's kind of interesting that one of the, big revealers of the scam was RFK Jr., who has just been sworn in as the Health and Human Services Chief. And if you notice, almost all mainstream media, any article you read about this guy, they're going to bash him. They're going to call him a nutcase and all this. But, I mean, if you just listen to what he says, you read his book, and you look at the information that he's putting out there, I mean, you don't have to agree with all of it, but he's obviously saying something important because he's offending the powers that be big time. He wants to make America healthy again. All he talks about is health. And this is the son of Robert F. Kennedy Sr., who was assassinated right after JFK was. So, there's a lot going on here with this guy being so high up in, the political spectrum right now around the very same time that these declassifications are happening. So, I don't know, there's something very big here that, we need to step back and realize we're living in very profound times, very interesting times, historical. And as far as 9/11, I mean, it's at the point where there's just so much overwhelming evidence that nanothermite found at ground zero, which is the type of particles that can only be found when military-grade explosives are present. Obviously hinting to a controlled demolition or some type of premeditated pulling of the buildings, to, Larry Silverstein admitting right on TV that they decided to pull Building 7 when the FEMA report says that Building 7 came down by fire and it wasn't hit by a plane. So, I mean, we know that something isn't right here. So I think that the best thing we can get out of this is a newfound trust for these establishments that we've come, at least in the, conspiracy community, to distrust so thoroughly. The CIA, the FBI, MI5 in Europe, the three-letter agencies. The idea that we could perhaps trust some of these institutions someday again, I think lays on how well this plays out and whether there's any accountability, because that's what it comes down to. I mean, whether we're talking about this stuff or the Chris Cornell death or anything, the all the deaths in the music industry I'm always talking about. I mean, who is responsible? I mean, these are evil people making decisions in some dark room somewhere. Who the fuck are these people? And how do they stay in the dark and protected in the shadows? Like, when are we going to yank them out and say, hey, buddy, who do you think you are? And do something about it. I mean, there's a deep kind of cleansing, I think, that can happen to individuals and a society as a whole by just finally seeing justice really happen. I think a lot of us are very cynical. A lot of the people that don't watch videos like mine or don't listen to anything I say or don't even really follow politics or religion or anything, I think a lot of people are just cynical. And because they're getting beaten over the head with cynical news media for so long and propaganda, they just become numb to it. And all they really care about is how much money they're making and how well they're doing that way. So this is something to keep an eye on, something kind of interesting. And, the MLK files, I mean, I think most people assume, just like they do with JFK, that Martin Luther King was assassinated by someone on the inside. Probably the FBI or the CIA, something like that. But, like John F. Kennedy, he wasn't a perfect person. I'm sure there were things that were kind of shifty about him, Was it really that he was taken out because he was pissing off the powers that be too much? Or were the powers that be the ones that put him there in the first place, and it was just his mission was over, it was time to go? Kind of like Malcolm X. I'm just asking questions here. I don't know a whole lot about the death of Martin Luther King, other than, it's pretty obvious. It was an inside job. I just sort of assumed that. But I find it interesting how little we're hearing about this in the news media that is so obsessed with race and racial division. And I think the reason the news media is kind of quiet on this is because the news media is all about sowing racial division. And unleashing the Martin Luther King files is something that could potentially unite us. The common enemy of blacks and whites, which is a deeper organization embedded in our society that is invested in racial division. And the media does not want that exposed. And it also makes Trump look good because, you know, they love calling Trump a Nazi this and Nazi that, and Elon Musk is a Nazi and that. Well, okay, but how come no other president was, released the Martin Luther King files? Is that something a Nazi does? I kind of doubt it. It's not a very good argument there. Anyhow, this is all pretty fascinating, so something I'm going to be paying very close attention to.